by saying that this is a group of really strong artists. I'm very happy to be working with them. And I'm really drawn to their work. So, women's work is kind of a loaded subject. So, we're just going to start off by talking about the work itself, because I think it shares a lot of similar characteristics in the sense of, attention to detail, repetitive elements, and a real fine quality to the work, which I think characterizes women's work often. So with that, we'll start off with Terri.
Well, okay.
Yes.
Begs to differ.
And we're going to just sort of get up and walk around and talk about the work. So, and then I'm sure the conversation will go into other levels of what women's work means. So, but for now, we're just going to talk about the formal aspects of it and the practice of it and what it means to be a woman artist.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and before I talk about my work, I'll just say, we've met once, the four of us, to just talk about what is women's work. I mean, the title of the show kind of came about because you happened to realize that you had picked 5 women who work. And we didn't want to kind of overblow that. But what we really did find out was that it's very important to us, and it really applies to all of us. And all 4 of us in our educations, 3 of us went to women's colleges. You went to a college that had a very specific design major towards women in the arts, or women.
Yeah, it was a sort of a feminist pedagogical model.
Yeah.
Where was that?
All 4 of us would probably readily.
That was the question. What's that?
Where was that? What's called?
It's called the Vermont College of Fine Arts.
Vermont?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And when was that? I don't know anything. When was that program started?
It was the first low residency art program ever started. And it was based really on pedagogy, so learning from the students and kind of having a collective discourse really around works that involve race, class, and gender.
Sydney, you went to Bennington, right? And then Jennifer and I both went to Moore College of Art in Philadelphia, the only all-women's art college in the universe, I think. Might be one on Venus. But we kind of knew of each other, but we're 10 years or so apart.
Right.
And I think, we had our expectations being in college as feminists, getting a feminist education, because basically we're really mostly, in many cases, disappointed as young feminists. So, which makes you more of a feminist. That's the good news. So, I kind of would like to get a little bit of a discussion about that going on, about where we come from as artists, as women artists. And so this is my body of work. This is, it's called Intervals. And it's a body of work that I actually started about 5 years ago, and I showed some of them at the alcoves, the first group of alcoves show at the museum. And some of those are in here. Those, when they were in that show, they were vertical. So there's a kind of an interesting little feminist analogy that I toppled all that verticality. And I've been working on this since then, off and on, but really mostly this year, revisiting the whole body of work. I've often worked horizontally with this kind of plotting idea of an organic kind of abstract shape that's kind of moving through space. Sometimes it's more like landscape. In this case, the reference is more to music and to to how color is like music. Because, and even a lot of the terminology that's used in color, talking about color.
Tonality.
Tonality, yeah. I have a statement here. So yeah, things like tone, pitch, value, harmony, movement, texture. So, and I would also say that in my young student years, I hung around with a lot of students who went to Curtis Institute in Philly who were musicians. And I just thought they were really brilliant. And so I feel like I learned a lot about abstraction more from talking to musicians and applying that to my painting work. It was unconscious in a way, but it was my way of understanding form and color by listening to kind of a lot of really modernist music and getting I could I can listen to music, and I don't think I'm one of those people who sees and understands color. What is that called? Synesthesia?
Yeah.
But in a way, I might be. I understand that color has a property. I saw Elvin Jones once on Dick Cavett. He was sitting there in front of, at his drum set, and he was saying, you know, can you hear that? That's yellow. Can you hear that? That's purple. It was so cool. And I get that. And so I listen to music a lot. But I also don't want to push that so far. Another thing I would say is that dealing with this rounded form, I think, comes from a sort of a feminist imagery in and of itself. Now that might sound like a cliche. I remember saying to another abstract painter, I feel like I'm always painting out the penis in my paintings, you know? If there's like a particular shape, I'm like, get that out of there. And she was like, I just gave up, I just paint a whole lot of them. But at one point or another, as an abstract painter, you know, there are things like verticality, horizontality, centralness, roundedness, the color red, for God's sakes, at times. So, I kind of have really gotten into this sort of thing that when I'm working hard-edged, I tend to work with a rounded form. When I'm working with kind of linear stuff, I tend to feel okay with a rectangular form, but it's usually see-through. So the more, you know, I was such a feminist artist in the 70s and read everything and, you know, consider myself a pretty radical feminist. But over the years, you know, 40 years of being an artist, in a way I've absorbed so much of that into my work, I don't even talk about it that way anymore. So when we all met and started talking, it was really pretty fun, because we were like, damn, where'd that go, you know? It's in there, but it's not a verbal thing that we would necessarily call things.
It's integrated.
Yeah, which in itself is feminist.
Yes.
So what is that? We got into talking about how women have to, this is always dangerous territory, but just bear with us here. There's a kind of sense of having to pull things together a lot, you know, kind of collage-like approach in art making. And leaving the work and coming back to the work. So that to the point, and in my case it's exactly true, I had to come up with a way I could make an abstract painting that I didn't have to come in after a week of day job or whatever and like heat the whole thing up again, because it was a real waste of energy. So by working with individual panels here, right, and also I brought my scale down as a way of being able to, so now we're talking about work and having a day job too, but how do you keep, how do you integrate? And then how, you know, integration and bringing things together is something, it's a value. So it's not just, oh, I'm managing. It's that, oh, this is what I'm really interested in, is holding 3 or 4 ideas in one, you know, vibration. So I would say, I mean, we can all talk further on, but I just wanted to let you know this is what this work is about to some degree. I came to this smaller scale, more honed down kind of imagery. It's just my development as an artist, but it's also come from a kind of necessity, which is fun. It feels good to have my work come out of some kind of necessity, even if it's a personal one. And we can talk about that further in terms of imagery later, I guess. So that's what I would say so far. Take it away, Sydney.
How about you?
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to.
Oh, well, I agree, and I think, you know, all 4 of us own businesses, and so we do that. We have other jobs. We run households. You know, we have gardens, we cook, we clean, we do it all, and we also do our work. So, and Cindy's got kids. So that is a lot. And so there is this sense of compartmentalization as far as how the process works. And for me, it's, you know, the hard edge paintings, it's like, yeah, you can just pick it up after you've done the 10,000 things that you have to do in any given day, and go back to it. So that's definitely part of the experience. And I think I said this yesterday when we were talking to Honey Harris, which is that, you know, we have to sort of approach our work in a non-linear way, because there is so much else that we need to bring to completion to sort of, you know, create the grounding of a full life, essentially.
Yeah, when we were discussing this, the first time we met, one of the things I said I struggled with was this, and I know everybody knows this concept of the serious artist wakes up every day and works from 7 o'clock to midnight, and that person is a yes. No woman I know does that, even, the most successful women artists I know. So that paradigm is just, fuck it. It doesn't exist, first of all, and it really is, it's oppressive.
And
It's
it's also
absolutely
old
oppressive.
school. I don't think anybody can really sustain that.
I still think that these images
Yeah.
exist, they are oppressive. So one of the things I think about you, we've discussed this many times about your process, and I'm sure it's the case for all of us, is you know how to get down immediately. You know how to get into your studio and, you set this rhythm and you feel it in your work. And so you left it there, but you know how to get in and go, goodbye world and hello work, and get in there. And you can feel it. I don't feel some shift taking place. I can't locate it, right, in attention. I look at this work and I see, transparency in some and opacity in others, and I think about, how do you make that determination? And I was looking very closely at your process, and I just, I think, yes, there is this diversity of endeavors that we're taking on over time. But I think the discipline in the work is absolutely apparent to me. So I just
It's apparent in your work too, for sure. And can you talk to the process of gilding and how that speaks to the stop-start nature of how we have to
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
practice?
before I started gilding, I was making oil paintings, and there are ways to make oil paintings that you can stop and start, but not very many. And especially the way that I like to work, sort of thick and with a lot of glazes and things like that. And when I actually got pregnant, I thought, well, I can't do this anymore like this. What am I going to do? And actually, I just didn't work for a while. I think I worked on my house. But one of the appeals of gilding is, aside from the field, which absolutely needs to be done in one space of time, the imagery or the drawing or the prepping of the panels, all of these, the work, can be done in a modular way. And one of the mechanisms I used, I'm also a contractor, and there would be weeks at a time I wouldn't be able to get in my studio, and I had a book. I don't know if you do this, but wherever I left, and it's always that really difficult point when you're so deeply in the work and you have to leave. I was like, how do I capture that, keep it, and receive it when I get back in the studio? So what I do is keep a notebook, and I write very clear directions to myself. You were here, you were thinking about this, you were doing this, this is the next step. And so the next time I come in the studio, I look at it, I read it, I try to get myself in that place, and then I do what I told myself to do. So gilding absolutely is a method that allows for that.
Terri, how does your process relate to
I actually have a piece of writing that's based on the process itself. Do you mind if I read it? It's about 4 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And it speaks to this concept that Sydney was just talking about, of discipline. And my works are in the back corner here, and then the sculpture here and one around the corner. Being alone is a discipline. If I were to define myself from the past year, that would be my statement. When we begin to truly become critical of our world, sometimes it propels us to question more than just theory. I looked so many times at my iPhone seeking a message. I looked so many times at my clothing seeking armor. I looked so many times at myself, the self as me, myself. I looked for someone who could talk small. I looked for someone who could smile fake. I looked for someone who could be a woman, be a woman, be a woman. And I found no one. I found not a soul, not a sight of her. Where is she? Where is she? I avoided her, I avoided him, I avoided they. They avoided me. It was quiet and I thought about losing my mind again. It was quiet and I just wanted it to be quiet. I didn't want to lose, I just wanted quiet. Being alone is a discipline. To be truly alone and quiet. And to really look, not just see. And to really say, not just mean. And to really know, not just guess. And to really speak, not just talk. And to really frown, not just smile. To be a woman, be a woman, be a woman. Botox. I researched Botox yesterday. I thought about how I could inject myself with hatred. Society's hatred of me. In my face. In my smile. In my fake smile. In my worried eyes. In my frightened forehead. Erasure. In the truth of my country. In the truth of the human race. The race of man, mankind. Race till the end. Run, one foot in front of the other. Run, born to run away. Being alone is a discipline. Being perfect is ... I started drawing these dots.
All right.
I drew dots. Thousands of them, millions of them. I sat in my studio and I drew dots for 1 year, one Christian year. I looked at humanity and it was looking at me. In dots, it looked, it said, it was here, I found her. I looked at myself, the self is me, myself. The dots made themselves, I didn't make them. Showed me they, me showed they showed me. I was pregnant with all of these dots. I thought about being a mother. I dreamt about being a mother. I dream about being a mother. I felt the swell, the dot. I'm sorry. It grew larger. It was humanity. I made it. The dot. I thought about quiet. I craved quiet. In the quiet, I heard myself loving myself. I heard myself creating the dot. I heard the dot growing. I heard myself loving the dot. The dots. They made me. We make it all, we as women, and then we lose it all as women. We created humanity. What a cruel trick for your creation to hate you. Perhaps no one remembers that we created it all. Humanity, mankind, the race, the worst race. We don't have to create, but they make us. We don't need conspiracy. Our own lives are ugly enough. I started drawing dots to be quiet. They are so quiet, just a dot, just millions of dots, now billions of dots. I wanted to know I could be a mother because I realized that I am so hated as part of my race, womankind. I wanted to know that I could love and not be hate and not create more. Because if I create more, ... Images throughout all of history, images throughout all of time, prehistory, mankind. They made themselves, we made ourselves, we made this civilization. Existence, it's all just a dot, a small little dot.
So that brings up the whole idea of one as a creator. And so, where do we go from there? Sorry.
Well, can I say a little, pick up on something too, the thing about, I know you're about to talk, I just want to say,
No.
the thing about quiet and space, it goes, like if we think of a room of one's own, this has not changed, where women are still fighting to find their space, whether it's the body, whether it's the studio, whether it's the voice, and certainly whether it's the work, And it's still like that. I mean, look what we're up against right now with anyway, we won't get into Hillary hating. But no, I'm not going to go dark. I promised I wouldn't do that. But I just want to say the creating and also the holding of a space of one's own, not just this outer thing, not that that's all creating is, but what you're talking about is coming into yourself to hold your own space. I think that's something that's often in women's work, and certainly in all of our work, again, I would say. And I love what you're that gives so much insight into their work and their process.
Did you happen to, anybody read that the Guerrilla Girls opening at Whitehall in London? And I didn't realize this, but they've been around for 40 years. It's astounding, and the needle hasn't moved. That's the frightening thing. But their current exhibition is they sent out, I think, 400 and some odd surveys to European institutions to, get them to respond. And only 1 in 4 responded, 25% of them. And the major institutions like the Pompidou and all that didn't even bother to even respond back to their survey. But the bottom line still is that it's a shocking number. It's like for a lot of these institutions, it's like 80 or 88% of the collection is men, and almost 90% of it is all white people. And so, so that's their mission, their mantra, and what have you. But it was just interesting that they had this big exhibition in London, but it's like, they sort of feel like for 40 years, has anything changed?
Yes,
and,
it's not.
Well, I think it is a little bit, and I think that was part of my motivation to bring together a group of women. And when we had Santa Fe Collective, just by virtue of the fact of the work that I liked, it was women, and it was gay people, and
People of color.
and people of color, and, Native Americans. So, I mean, the idea of creating space for that, you just have to go in and create the space for it. And that's how it
Yourself
gets
and each
done.
other, yeah.
Yeah, and so that, we can all, and I've said this many times about Santa Fe, it's just like, you kind of have to create your own fun. And so that's what we're doing.
I think I wanted to just say that Jen was the first person to encourage me with my work. I had just gotten out of undergraduate school and we met. I was so shy and had no idea. And Jen has really been that person for a lot of artists. Really, truly, she has.
But I love art, and I love seeing what people make, and this is my community, and so let's make stuff together and make stuff happen. That's kind of the way I feel about it.
Well,
So.
That's sometimes quite rare in this town, because there's the real careerism. I'm going to get where I get. I'm not going to tell you what grants available, because then I might have some competition. I'm not putting down Santa Fe, but I came out of Philly where there were 4 art colleges, and people really supported each other, and there were co-op galleries, and people knew who the faculty and it just had a different feel. And I feel that's starting to happen here, and certainly from Santa Fe Collective.
And I think this is also a very feminist point of view, which is more of a collaborative rather than a competitive paradigm. So, that's certainly been my aim, because I like working with people. I like working alone, but I also like working with people. So, when we can come together and create something together, it's powerful. And, I'm really proud of this show. I'm proud of all of you guys. You guys have made beautiful work, and it's like, I know, that's happening here in this town. So that's exciting. So do we want to get up and take a look around? And so we can talk about
let's
her
talk
work?
about your work, too.
Okay, we can talk about my work. But, maybe Cindy, you could talk about the Indra's net idea and, that imagery. And then we can talk about the video a little bit, and then we'll talk about my work, and then come back in and talk about Thesis.
Sure.
Okay. So everybody wants to gather around or look or
Well, I think
whatever?
we can see here,
Yeah.
and then we can look
Yeah,
back.
okay.
Has everybody seen the video? Awesome, nice piece. Just refer to them a little bit maybe, but, well, I'd like to talk about, beauty, right? Decorativeness, right? These are 2 concepts that, in my coming up and coming of age that were really vilified and put down and criticized, and you weren't serious if your work wasn't ugly, and you had nothing to contribute. And so one of the things that I was criticized as being in college was a decorative painter.
Isn't that the worst?
Yeah.
I've been criticized for that too.
Right? And I'd say, well, what's that? Where's that coming
Each
from?
was a different.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
So that's a route. Another route is that when I was my grandmother, my Jewish grandmother would tell me this story that when I was a toddler, she had this incredible huge book of Egyptian art. And she would babysit me and I'd flip it upside down and then read it in tongues. And get really excited on the gilded pages. And yeah, I was just thinking on my drive over here about like the stories that you hear about yourself from your family and your friends and how they influence your sense of self, and who you are, or who you think you are. And then, you know, maybe adulthood's about sort of weeding through like what feels true and what doesn't. But one of the things, so I associated, I don't know, something sort of quiet, internal, and sort of central about me with sort of shininess, for lack of a better word. And then, you know, this thing happened that was kind of interesting. My father's an artist, and he is from Southern California, and there was this whole school of art that was very much about light and surface, and I didn't grow up with him until, I didn't meet him really until I was 8 years old, and I got, you know, realized I had this other father, got on a plane, flew to Los Angeles, and was suddenly sleeping in this giant warehouse with these big resin pieces on either side of me, you know, by myself. I was 8 years old, looking at these things, and I was thinking also on the way over, like, well, what did I think about these things? And one of my thoughts was, you know, what's there? You know, what is that? What's there? And I'm sure I asked my father, and I'm sure he said, "That's it, man. The there." You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. That's all you need to know, kid. But I, like, so that gets added, right? So there's this more ancient thing with my grandmother, and there's this thing with my father, and then there's this thing in college about decorativeness, and the accusation of decorativeness led me to become a decorative painter, actually, as a career. I met a girlfriend. Yeah, I met a girlfriend in New York. I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm doing it. You know, I'm a decorative painter." And I was like, "Oh, I am too." "What are you doing? What's that?" And she said, "Oh, you know, you get paid pretty well. I'm working on this cruise ship." So I got this job being a decorative painter. I was like, "Oh, I was born for this." Anyway, in this process, there was a moment where I was gilding a door. Inside and out, huge thing, and I had, you know, you kind of apprentice. Gilding is kind of still a guild. It's an interesting thing. But then you just got to experiment, because actually gilding at this scale is not that common. I mean, gilding a big dome, interior perhaps, or something like that, but generally in like icons and things like that, they would tend to be, you know, small, because as the gilders in this room know, it gets distorted over a large expanse. It's really hard to control the thinness or thickness of the size, which is essentially the glue that holds it down. So I noticed, which, you know, I love the process, I noticed in the process that you can never do a perfect job of gilding. You'll always need to patch it, right? And when you patch it, no matter how thinly you apply the size, how perfectly, how wonderfully you let it set up, when you put leaf on leaf, it'll look great from 3/4 or even 9/10 of views, but there'll be an angle at which it'll stick out like a sore thumb. And it'll either be, I'm sure you can see from where you sit, what I would say positive or negative. So positive being light, right? Or negative being dark. And it shifts depending on where you're standing in relation to the plane of the painting. So something that was a real liability in decorative painting became, you know, a real method in this work. And what I was really interested in, I'm kind of a loud, brash person. I tended to make work that was very visually assaulting and very, you know, aggressive. And I was at a point in my life where I thought, okay, I have to learn this thing about being more quiet, and like, you know, I had gotten very far by just sort of pounding my way through. But it is like your question, my question, your question, your question. It's like, what the hell is it to be a woman? I don't know. Did I feel particularly like a woman? Not really. Did I not feel like a woman? Not really. Like, I think we all define these things for ourselves, you know. But what I personally, as whatever human being on the earth, needed to learn was to kind of step back a little and I felt like the same thing that I needed to do, which, I mean, the thing between us is space, but it's also skin, right? That's where I start. Painting is skin, leaf is skin, and I was, you know, educated very much about the picture plane and flatness and what happens there, or illusory space and what happens and how do you create that. So thinking very much about the surface, I was thinking a lot about time, about how I was interested in making work that revealed itself in time. And so this work very much is about being with it, living with it, moving around it, and experiencing it in your own time. I joke about this, but it really is true that I feel like a lot of the concerns that I have in these paintings is very much like the current concerns of, you know, the great masculine Western art earthworks, right? Which are like, you gotta make a pilgrimage to get there and do all these things, and what do you do when you get there? You sit and observe, and you watch the light, and you feel yourself in space, and you locate yourself, and you see things a little differently, right? And I think, well, that's great, but could I do that in my own home? Could you do that in your own home? And the answer is, of course, right? So, yeah, I think it's a much more feminine and feminist response. And one more thing about the imagery, so in here with eyelash curlers and speculums, and here with the sort of animated hair and light for lighting film and dishwasher. I just had this intuition about what images worked and what didn't, and you know, this is the way art works, and it's interesting, right? So I just kept like this image, yes, no, and I didn't understand it myself, and I actually made a joke with David about his love of spreadsheets. But I did, I laid out in a grid, you know, the types of material, you know, images, materials. So hair is you know, human, animal, but a lot of these things are metal, and so I'm like, why is it metal? Why is it not hair that's just hanging, but animated hair? Why is it a dishwasher that's open? Why is it not a closed dishwasher? So, and I just started looking at things, and it was one of those moments, the 100,000th dot in my studio, aha moment. The skin of the painting, for me, is the place where transformation takes place. All of these images are images of transformers or something in the state of transformation. So the hair, which is, you know, unanimated with wind, becomes something fabulous. You know, a dishwasher, you know, moves something from one state to another. A light illuminates. Speculum opens. You know, eyelash curler transforms something straight to something curled. So that was my, you know, my experience of my own unconscious, you know. Without going into Indra's net too much, because I've talked quite a bit, I'd just like to say that the Chainlink, the image of Chainlink came up. David was actually sitting in meditation for a week at Upaya, and he and I were having a little bit of a difficult time, and I was thinking about the nature of love. And I thought, well, in my language of metal, of tools, of transformational tools, you know, what is love? How does love work? How does it function? What do I think love is? And I worked through it. He was doing his meditation, you know, I was doing mine. And again, it kind of hit me. I thought about the places where we intersect, but then we diverge, and then we come back together, and then we diverge, and then we come back together, and then we diverge. And also that, to me, love is something really strong but permeable. You know, it's very present, right? But you can see through it. You can feel through it. And that image came to me, and I made one pretty fast, kind of fast and furious, and then I went to this talk at the Zen Center in the middle of the week. And then, what was her case? Who became teaching children? No. Who was talking about IndrasNet? Enki Roshi was talking about IndrasNet, which is precisely this image. Essentially, it's this place where in the universe there is an intersection and then a divergence, and this concept that there are all of these interconnected points where we're all existing. And so it was just one of those incredible serendipitous moments where, again, the things that we've learned and studied, right, so intently and let go of, reassert themselves, and there's a point at which you can just have faith in that. So,
Great. Absolutely. Sydney taught me how to gild. And I taught Chris how to gild. So there's a lineage. Yeah, there's a lineage in this gallery for this show. And I can relate to some of what you said in terms of process as far as getting to that place of quiet and that space of, time where you can be with yourself in your process and sort of like the structure of the process, the repetitiveness, how do I even want to describe it? I can't really say. It's just a quiet space that you can, push everything else out to the periphery and just really think about things. My practice involved, I wanted to be an abstract painter from day one, and they didn't like that in my high school. So, so I caught a lot of flack for that, but I pursued it, and I basically deconstructed it to the point of paintings are made one brush stroke at a time. And so my paintings are made one brush stroke at a time, and they're laid next to each other. And they start at the middle and they build out to the end, to the edges. So they're just very simple that way. And the form is, usually I like squares. I like the solidity of a square. I like the perfection of a square. I like the perfection of geometry. And then to allow the hand to operate within that structure. That's it. That's basically what I do. And of course, color is an amazing structure. So it's an endless exploration. And that's sort of where I'm at. I mean, I think Terri and I think we all share a very formal quality to our work, which is what has drawn me to this work as a curator. But what draws me to Terri's work is that there's a familiarity with that formal practice and that formal approach, which we probably learned it more, for better or worse.
Yeah.
So
Good to have that.
I agree. Does anybody have any questions?
Can I say something?
Oh, sure.
I just want to pick up, not to try to be the moderator and pull this together, but what I'm remembering, like Susan Rothenberg gave a talk at the museum some years back, or maybe it wasn't there, maybe it was just in some kind of informal conversation, but she said women painters, she was talking about, but women artists, when they're in the studio, when they're struggling with something, they say, what's wrong with me? And that male painters tend to say, what's wrong with this piece I'm working on? And so what she was saying was, and she very explicitly was talking to women, don't ask that question, it will stop you. It will, that space we seek, when we find it, we feel so lonely and isolated because we haven't, felt we deserved to take up that space. And this is partly in reference to what you're saying, but all of us, that, but it makes women's work to me so interesting because there's always this struggle, inner struggle that all women, I know these are generalizations, but the four of us can speak that when we're in our working process, we're struggling with the fact that we've taken our space, that we've said no to so many other things. And so the work becomes about taking that space and asserting that space. But it's also a real danger for women artists to say, what's wrong with me? Because that's what we're taught. That, it's wrong to be egocentric. It's wrong to be selfish. It's wrong to be, focused. It's wrong to say no to people. So it makes women's art about that on a certain level at times, I would say. And in our case, it's...
Inherently, I think there is a part of that. I personally have not had that experience. I mean, I haven't. I literally was brought up to be like, you can do whatever you want to do, okay? You can do what you want in this world, so I'm doing it.
Okay.
And it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm saying that it's, I've never felt like, I get irritated when I have too many demands on my time, but, and I don't get to work, for sure. I'm feeling that right now, but, at a certain point, you just have to fight for it.
Yeah.
So,
I think part of what we're talking about too is how the process is in fact the product in a lot of our works, and conceptually how that process really ties into the final product, not being necessarily so product driven, although there is a fineness to the show that you were speaking of, but really that the process informs so much of women's work and how that relates to the final product.
and I also think that applies to whatever other practice women do, whether it's, keeping their house, or making a meal, or
Well, and
whatever.
historically in women's
Yeah.
crafts, like needlepoint and
Sure.
quilts and things. I mean, women
Totally.
built the buildings at Chaco, the men went out and got the rocks. But, that assembling, bringing together of this kind of repetitive, almost boring, kind of work has been what we got to do in those times.
Well, we did evolve to have finer motor skills. I think so.
You guys are saying stuff, I'm like, is that true? Okay.
Who knows?
I don't know.
I mean, there are male surgeons, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I know, it's goofy that you can make these generalizations. I like to just keep going back to the feminist art movement of the 70s and the 80s and what those women asserted and, pay great homage to them. And then watch it be absorbed by male artists in the 80s.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing the grid now, everybody's doing decorative, there were the men decorative painters, then decoration was very serious, right? And it's been really, the longer you live, the more you see history rewritten, and you just see things be obscured or silenced that you were very much a part of. So I see that so in terms of what those women did in the 70s and the 80s, and I was there in the 80s too, but, and it's brought us into so much, brought us into land art, installation art, video art. I think women were at the forefront of all three of those movements. And so yeah, women's studies became a whole lot of other cultural studies, race studies, a lot has come out of the women's movement, and specifically I would say the women's art movement. And just kind of.
Absolutely. Did you have a question?
No, I have a comment. I'm Jennifer's mother.
Taught at Moore College of Art.
Disclaimer. First, I'd like to congratulate you for, and secondly, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is very exciting. It's rare when a group of women artists come together and feed each other and support each other. This has happened traditionally in art history. You think of the Renaissance, Donatello and Brunelleschi. They'd stay up all night discussing art. The Impressionists, they loaned each other money. They supported one another. So for me, to see you four very exciting artists come together, discuss your practices, it's very powerful. Don't stop here. Keep going and bring more women in.
Definitely.
There's no shortage of wonderful women artists in this town. In fact, I was thinking it would be great to just sort of have a huge survey show of women's
Yeah, I've been-
art.
I've been putting that shit together in my head too.
Yeah.
ZCA, unless these guys want to give us the whole place.
No, I think it would be a
And look
really
at the
great thing.
administrators in this town.
Yeah.
You know, you've got Mary Kershaw, Mary Scully, Catherine Davis, women who are movers and shakers in the art world here.
Absolutely.
Lucy Lepard lives here. I
Armene
know I'm
Hammond.
forgetting all kinds of people
Yeah.
who are administrating as well and keeping it alive. And
Could I say something
You say
to that
something.
there? Thanks, you guys. I was struck by what David said about the Guerrilla Girls and how much institutions have not changed. And also when you mentioned how many women are heading our museums and working at positions where they might not in other places. One of the things I wanted to address is that women don't get paid very much
Right.
to do those things. Let me rephrase that. The positions do not pay very well here in New Mexico with the state museum system. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we tend to have a lot of women in those positions.
I agree.
Because no men would take it.
Because the men will not, are not interested in those salaries. That's just a thought. I've had a lot of years to sort of think about that. That's kind of a decision, a conclusion, and a belief I've come to that I don't need anybody else to believe. The other thing is speaking of institutions, has the Pompidou exhibited 12 more women in the last 40 years because of the women's movement? I don't know, but again, speaking back to the idea of institutions, those are very male, patriarchal, mostly white institutions of bankers who are trying to clean their name up, people who didn't do anything even as clean as banking, which we all know is one of the most corrupt fields there is. These are men who are trying to buy culture for themselves and their families, and trying to, maybe in some perverse way, pay back what they have done. And
You're giving them way too much credit for even having thought about that.
they just want status. And so the bottom line is, no, things that don't change on the institutional level because that's where the patriarchy lives.
Right.
They have changed, I'd say, in the last 40 years.
Yeah, on the general.
Intimately and,
And on the entry
individually,
level or,
collectively.
the lower paid level.
But what the Guerrilla Girls were talking about today, though, is, what was earlier, I guess the show from 2 days ago, or whatever it was, but it just got covered today in the press. But one of the things they point out is, you're correct, there's more and more women in the ranks of power within the museums, but the real power doesn't reside there, it resides in the boards.
Exactly. Not
And the
curators.
boards are where the power brokers are, which are largely male. And what they keep pointing out, and it's been pointed out by a lot of other people too, is that what ends up happening is these people wield a lot of power because what they want to do is influence the value of their collections.
Exactly.
And the way to do that is funding the institutions at the level of, at the board. So it is pretty corrupt is what they're saying still throughout the system. So that's why they're changing their focus now to basically, and if you think about it, this is a lot of what Hans Haacke and people did back, remember with the Met, what was in the 70s and 80s, was showing that they were the slumlords.
Right.
and sort of humiliating them that way to make some change. And so what they're doing now is putting pressure on the power brokers who are on the boards and trying to expose what's in their collections, and ironically, what is actually major museum shows at the institutions, the boards they sit on. So, they're kind of playing hardball at that level is kind of where they're shifting their fight. So it'll be interesting to see how that, it won't be easy, it'll get ugly, but, it's still a
It
sort of.
still really just reflects the culture. The change is not happening there. And, I think we artists like to think that we're making something change. But you're right, that huge infrastructure institutionalized sexism and racism is just really.
Well, that's the thing too, that one of the women pointed out, was the collections are massive, so you can't expect the collections to change
They're not gonna just
immediately.
de-access all their
Yeah,
data.
they're not gonna de-access what they have, but Catherine's point
Make room
is
for
the right
us.
point, is over the last 4 years, or 10 years, or 15 years, what has been the change in terms of acquisitions and exhibitions? So there are the things going forward that could show as a sincerity to try and make that happen. They can't change the past, I mean, and but anyway. So there's lots of metrics that they're trying to point out that you can look at, to look for the, are things changing and improving in that regard?
I think I've admired the feminist group that did Women House a lot, because I think most of those women were truly terrified when they were making that work. And they were sort of thinking, why would I fight for crumbs at a table that I don't even want to sit at? And I think that's one thing that's been really profound about the feminist art movement and the works that we know of in that movement, is that those women created works really outside of the patriarchal art world. And then everybody, like Terri was saying, was completely influenced by them.
Right, and they didn't make a product that could be bought and sold.
And they didn't want into the art world. And I often don't want into the art world. I don't know how you all feel about that. And, I won't go dark. But, the point was really to be, there was pretty radical thinking and work going on there. There was talk about a lot of things besides, getting your career a leg up. So, yeah, you're right.
Well, I think the art world has changed a lot in the last 25 years. It's
Yeah.
not-
Kidding, yeah.
Schools have changed a lot.
Yeah.
I think
Well, the
that,
graduate school phenomena,
yeah.
which I came out of college in '77, undergraduate school it's called now. And I decided right then, people were starting to have to go to graduate school. And I did make a very decisive choice to not go to graduate school, because I could feel that it was this sort of careerism thing going on. And I don't know how I knew that, must be my class belligerence, but I didn't want to get professional. I wanted to be, an artist. And even hearing people say practice to me is still hard for me to hear, because I always think of it as work. And I know practice is another word, and that it's a beautiful word in a lot of ways. It reflects, yoga and meditation and kind of a consciousness movement, and I think that's great. But all that change, I was there, you were right behind that change, but it was going that way, where the thing was to have a profession and to have esteem and have, a graduate degree.
Let me ask you this, Terri. Did a lot of women from your class end up being artists?
You mean, are they still making art?
Mm-hmm.
No, I can just say no. for
Yeah,
sure.
I can say no too.
I can say no too.
Yeah.
Terri.
I can actually say that.
Yes. Oh,
I
yay!
I was just gonna say, I think it's changed a lot
Yeah.
for me personally in the past 10 years. I remember early on in my career, which I don't have much of one, but telling people that I was a feminist artist. People always ask me, well, what type of artist are you? And I would say, oh, I'm a feminist.
I hope so.
And well, it was really like an F-bomb. It was really like, you don't want to drop a dirty, dirty F-bomb, because you'll never get a show. And now, actually, people are very open to it. It's really weird. It's almost like the opposite. So I think it
There's
has
still
changed.
the WC bomb. If you say I'm a working class artist, see?
Tell us about Wonder Bitch.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, my final show for graduate school was called Wonder Bitch. And basically I elevated all of these awful ways in which we treat one another, but especially based on gender, on these Post-it notes. So it was sort of like elevating garbage too, and thinking about how you can make artwork literally garbage, and then someone might still consume it. And so it was really like It was my rage period in feminism, I would say. I was elevating these moments of people saying really terrible things to me, or things that I had said to other people that were terrible, based kind of on race, class, and gender, and elevating that garbage to the gallery. And it was diaristic, so it started based on kind of a situation I was trying to get myself out of, leaving myself little post-it notes like, don't do this, don't do that. And then eventually it just turned into this ongoing kind of diaristic model of the wall of shame, how gender binaries leave us.
Harmony Hammond is doing a project just like that right now. I don't know if you've heard about it. But since this whole women's art has been showing across the country, the big show that was going around, she's been at these shows and she's been taking notes of what she hears people saying. And they're mostly disparaging things about the women's movement or about women or about, and about her at times. And she's making work about those very words. Very interesting. Kind of way, again, to take something that, felt to be disempowering to bring it back,
Yeah, and how those little miffed moments actually can create part of our structure. They sort of do create part of society, and really thinking about what is the dialogue that we're having one another? What do all these little moments mean?
That's interesting. Does anybody have any other questions?
I was sort of struck by when we represented Judy for Chicago for a number of years, and her shows definitely brought an odd crowd. And it was really interesting, and both men and women. And the women were the part that surprised me. The men I didn't, it didn't surprise me when they would say disparaging things. But when women would come in and you go, she just hates men, sort of thing. And I'm like, why would you say that, sort of thing. And so it was just sort of interesting. They had this sort of pent up anger, and I never could figure out, I'd never dared quiz them a bit. I was always sort of curious, are you an artist? Are you, are you to figure out, are they jealous or something, or whatever. But it just was very interesting. When I said something to Judy about it, she just sort of laughed and she goes, well, she gets that a lot with women too. And she said that, I think
It's happening right now with Hillary Clinton. It's this
women are wired. Everyone's wired differently, and I think
hate the bitch.
we think women are all sort of the same, and they're not. And it's just, and Judy said there's just some women who just really feel very strongly that there is a woman's role, and that's and they feel like it's out of place what she does. And a lot of it too, Judy's just in your face. I mean, her work's just totally in your face, and so some people just don't like it.
So is Robert Motherwell's work. I mean, that's a perfect little story. That now here comes my rage period. My rage period didn't end.
Damn, what does it take to get her going?
But I mean, poor Judy Chicago. It's like she can't.
I wouldn't feel sorry for her.
I
Go on.
I'm not saying I feel sorry for her. I'm saying that she has had to play a particular role of being, battered around the same way Hillary Clinton has, because, she's too pushy. She's too this. That's too forward. That's too sexual. And it's a theme all through women's history. We don't have to go there, but
What's cool? David and I got to have a Passover Seder with her Haggadah that she made.
Cool, yeah.
Really super cool. And we were reading through it, and she was looking at me down the table, and looking at her. There were certain passages and things, and I was like, really? That was your choice? Okay, And at some point, she got up and she came around and she put her hands on my shoulder and she said, what? I just looked at her. Because I adore her, actually. I looked at her and I was like, and she said, it used to be radical. This is the truth. She said, I need to edit this. I need to push it. And I was looking at her like, that's radical.
well, that's a really interesting.
And so that's cool, you know what I mean? So that's what I say about her and why I love her, is you could say, yeah, she's in your face and it's radical, but for her, it's not radical enough.
Not enough.
And she's looking at me and seeing, and she would look at you and say, what do you think? Oh, you don't, okay, I'm gonna push it. And she's gonna push it further. So what has she learned? I don't feel bad for her because she has her
I don't think I feel
core
sorry for her
intact.
personally.
Yeah.
No, but she has her
I
core
just-
intact,
Yeah.
and she is authentic, right? And it's like, she's willing to take that on. She
And
did
she's
not
hated
stop.
for it. Yeah, that's all I'm talking about.
But she doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, she really,
I mean,
it
that's
doesn't
too
phase
bad,
her.
but she does not care.
And I think as women artists, it's like, you need to be able to speak your piece and make your work and not give a shit.
Yeah.
You know, you just need to be
Yeah.
able to not care what anybody thinks and to be strong. Yeah.
Well, I think that's true of humans.
Well, sure, of course.
All lives
And I-
matter, but it's
We're
particularly.
talking about women now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like the Black Lives Matter thing, right? It's like, oh, all lives matter. Yes, we know that. We're talking about Black lives right now,
Yeah.
right?
As you, when you were talking about galleries and so on, I remember when I started doing the castings, the intimate details of women's bodies, and having, you know, years ago, I haven't spoken to anybody in a while from the galleries, but years ago, having male gallery curators or whatever come out, and they actually looked at it and they said, oh, you know, we have nothing against vaginas, I mean, we love them, but, you know, we just can't show them and sell them. And it's very, very interesting. I saw them as beautiful curves and crevices that I saw in the landscape when I first came out here in New Mexico. That's how I interpreted the curves and crevices of New Mexico, within curves and crevices of celebrating women and all of their differences, and you know, so I think what it all comes down to is that we all have to, you know, it's hard to say, well, you shouldn't care about this or that or the other, but what we really do is, it's interesting when you spoke about the surface being important here, but what it really is underneath all that surface for all of you, and I definitely see it, is that everything comes from the gut and from the core, and then it just is expressed differently in just, you know, different media. Discipline, quiet. We yearn for quiet and space. And when we give ourselves that, Terri, is so interesting that you mentioned that the self-doubt. In every other aspect, there's self-doubt. But when I go into the quiet and space of my studio, there's a vision that I know in my heart I'm working toward. So that's probably the only place where I don't have doubt all the time.
Because that's the only place you can totally be free and do what you want.
And people who are non-artists don't even realize, I mean, I've had so many women who only know me peripherally and say to me, don't you ever get lonely? I mean, when I first moved out here, I spent so many hours, you know, reclusively in my studio. And they said, don't you ever get lonely? Don't you ever? It was an astonishing question to me. You
I
go
wonder
in
if they
there
asked
with a
Picasso
vision.
that.
What is that?
I wonder if they asked Picasso that. You know, I think it, anyway, I just wondered that.
So working toward a vision, we're just so lucky, and you, Bonnie, with your work, and I didn't recognize you well. It is, it's a passion, and we are just so lucky to have that passion, period.
Yes.
Well, lucky, yes, and we've all fought for it. You
Yeah.
know, I
It
have
just
kept a
becomes
space of
from
my
that
own
place.
wherever I have gone, no matter how poverty-stricken I have been, no matter what has happened in my life. I lived in a tiny, tiny, tiny little room in Tokyo, and I took a quarter of it for my stuff and my space and my creation, and I kept it there. And I always have kept it, and I will always
Mhm.
keep it, no matter what.
Has to
And
be.
it is not easy.
Mhm.
And it is not, there have been things every day and every hour of my life telling me, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this.
I actually stopped making art for a couple of years to live on land in women's community because I thought, you know, I felt like that there was this dichotomy. I either needed to feel sane and, you know, in a sense of in community and on land, which is a really important thing in my life, with my art. And I stopped making art. I thought I'm going to have the perfection of the life over the perfection of the work. But of course, you know, you get back to your work and it all feeds into it and becomes a subject. But I think that's, yeah.
I've taken breaks too, but I always go back to it, because it's just, has to be done. So, does anybody else have any?
More from the world.
Edie?
You have something to say.
Let's see, I came here because I love all of you guys and what you do, and I'm just kind of shockingly touched and emotional about just the conversation around women's work. You know, I think in the process of deciding to be an artist and doing your work, you know, the decisions around material, the decisions around subject matter, every decision is political.
Yeah.
It's a fight. And so I just see the work here, and there's such this beautiful insistence on taking up space. And yeah, so I'm totally appreciating this. And just the conversations around doubt. And so it brings me to the question, because I am so full of doubt almost every second of the day. So for you guys, when you don't know where to go, when you forget who you are, where do you go if you don't have a supportive partner? Or where do you go?
Even if you do have a supportive partner.
Even if you have a supportive partner, yeah, what do you do? How do you refine your way?
Who wants to go there?
It's not easy.
Well, I feel like I'm just coming out of a tremendous period of debt. Post-divorce, just sort of like depleted, 100% depleted. And I think in order to create, you need to be filled and full, been fed yourself, been fed by others, in order to have something to give that has meaning and power. And so I would say, if you're in doubt, feed yourself, be fed by others, right? Be patient. And there's something, you know, when you're younger, I think something, let's see if we agree on this, but I think that there is an element of faith which you only really can embody after quite a few cycles of doubt and sort of like a birth, death, rebirth sort of cycle with your own creativity and your own power. So that there's an element of faith. But what I learned in this last cycle is it's really important to be fed in order to create.
And it's also important to realize that it's yourself that you have to feed. You can't rely on externals, whether it's a partner or, you know, a job or whatever external there is. It's something that you have to fund in yourself. Mm-hmm. And to just sort of let go and trust that it's all going to be okay. And to just keep working. And stop, or not, yeah, and stop and start if you have to. Or, I mean,
it's really good to stop sometimes.
It's good. I'm an acupuncture school dropout. But then I made a whole huge series of acupuncture needles.
Which I love.
You know, but I had to say, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm tired of this game. I'm tired of the whole situation. I'm going to do something else that actually helps people.
Well, there's that, where we want our work to
but then at the same time, it
make
was
a
like,
difference in the
oh,
world.
God, I have to touch people all the time. So, you know, and there was a lot of doubt around that. But then, you know, it's like you come back to yourself and you come back to your practice and your, I know you don't like that word, but
It's okay, I'm starting to like it a little more.
I look at just in terms of like practice, like you know, like you just practice and you get better at it.
Practicing,
You know?
violin, yeah.
No, it's just like piano practice.
I like the feeding metaphor, but I think the metaphor I would use, what I do is go away for like 10 days camping by myself
That's a feeling.
in the middle. It's a feeding and it's also a regurgitation. So what I'm trying to say is it's about getting rid of congested, all the stuff, I feel like I take so much in terms of energy, which women do. No, I'm not trying to say you don't, I'm saying we do, I was trying to use my I words. I have to get uncongested, and that's again a space issue sometimes. Sometimes it's like doing some kind of body work, like I do Qigong, and that's a practice. But the land gives me that. It gives me that. I have a place to like just uncongest, so then I can bring in what feeds me and what's like energetic instead of, deadening energy or stagnant energy. Like an acupuncture.
Yeah, you gotta move the chi.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I've made a lot of work about doubt.
Yeah.
And you can always, if you are feeling in some way that that the doubt could feed you, I think a lot of my work has been about doubt. And I think that's just a huge part of the female experience, and my subjective experience in particular. But I want to give you I would love to talk to you about it afterwards.
Oh, well, it's so funny. After I said that and got all emotional, I thought, well, of course I know how to deal with it. I keep going, and you guys all know that. So it's a little bit silly, but just
Not silly at all.
not silly. There's something really interesting about the way we work, and when Jennifer, you said brushstroke by brushstroke, right? That it's such. In the moment of making, it's such a tiny thing that if you can get yourself into that brushstroke or the stitch or the line, then you're saved, right?
Pick it up, yeah.
But if you're thinking of the external world, you're so screwed. And there's a little bit of escape and a little bit of a purposeful intention in the work that we do. And it's always kind of can I get myself to just my little pencil line or my little dot
Or my big dot.
Right.
Or my sheet, or my blob, I think it's so interesting that all four of us really feel as strongly, just as you described it.
And
And the external world will always be there.
Yeah, well, I'd like to
Not-
add one thing too, that in my experience, that we'll see if, I think a lot of people experience this, but the other thing I experienced by the marking time, too, is then that connection to something really eternal and nonverbal and timeless. Right? So
It's the now.
that is profound too.
Yeah, and when you were speaking about the dots one by one, of course I was thinking about my favorite artist, Yayoi Kusama, who had OCD. And just, it's so funny, like all of us doing our work, we're on that very edge of losing it a little bit, right? So that same process, it's like, oh yeah, we're kind of mentally healthy, but almost not. So for those people who don't have that, some kind of outlet of expression. We're
There's
just
Fox
on
News.
that edge.
I think a lot of art today, and I would say men and women's art, is trying to find that space in a world gone mad, And in a way, I think it's kind of very personal. There's a lot of real personal abstraction going on that I would call. And sometimes I'm like, what's everybody doing? We're not seizing anything. We're not saying, it's a very different thing. And it's almost like survival art or something. It's just this put one foot in front of the next, and we're in our studios. And, we can all think, well, we're like Buddhist priests chanting for peace. And other times we just seem like we're so disconnected and looking after our own well-being. But it's important to do that, just because the world is so mad, we can't. It's hard to know how we're connected to it, but that we keep going is a political act, I think. for everybody.
Absolutely. It's an act of rebellion in a culture that doesn't totally value what we do. So I say go for it.
Yeah, and I just want to, I guess it makes me think of, there was definitely a time where things are so different now. There was a time where you couldn't speak about your work personally, or it wasn't taken, then it wasn't art, then it was personal, and it's, things are really different now because we're so diverse. If you don't make it personal, then it's almost nothing.
Or particular, yeah.
Particular,
But
right, particular.
I was at the talk last week, there was a, with all due respect, there's a young man artist who I thought just sounded like he'd just come out of graduate school. So there is still the school talking of ideas, this overemphasis on ideas at times, because when you're in school, you had better have an explanation, and it had better make sense, And I see that as we probably, as artists get older, they let go of some of that, holding on to having to prove you're smart kind of thing, and understanding that your experience is enough, is your, and taking it away. You know what I'm talking? Yeah, the whole gobbledygook thing that we all had to kind of get off of ourselves for years after art school and all that, it's wacky.
Well, and I think it goes to the mantra of the feminist art movement, which is the personal is political.
I thought this.
Yeah, I mean,
It's just true.
yep. So true. Can't deny it.
Can you speak a little bit about your,
About my process?
so your work?
I just feel
Yeah.
like I'm missing a piece here.
Okay. Well, do you want me to speak about
Whatever you would like. to
Okay.
speak
Okay.
Whatever's important.
Well, I talked a little bit about the process and I guess what I was thinking about when I did the reading. But I really surveyed, over the last year, I had a show called The Anonymous Author. It was really about women and sort of this idea that we create culture, but then a male god is really praised for the creation of humanity. And I really just tried to look for her. I looked at a lot of imagery of women throughout all of history, archaeological imagery, artistic imagery. I did a lot of reading and writing. I do a lot of writing in my practice. That's a huge part of my practice. And so this is a small part of the series. There was a lot of goddess figurines within the series. And then this series right here that has the two drawings with their Valdivian and Cycladic Venus figurines. There's many other pieces that go with them that include Venus imagery with Barbies and Bratz dolls. And those are painted in gold. And so it's sort of a comparison. I don't even know, I came to this point with it where I don't even know if it was so much a critique, but just really a comparison, just really looking, and making those dots and thinking, what is it? Where is she? Where is she? How can I find her? And then some of these other pieces were sort of more, I always follow a couple of texts too when I do a series of work. And I started following this one really boring text called The Predicament of Culture. I mean, it's like a fundamental text, but it's like a white guy talking about how other white guys predict culture and create culture and what we know of it. And so at that point I was sort of like superimposing imagery through different time periods. And like the piece on the bottom, for instance, right here it's ancient tools and wheels, and then it's superimposed with a skateboarding truck and skateboarding wheels, and the piece is titled Grind. Then the piece on top is a Grecian face figure sculpture with Lil Wayne's teardrops, and it's called Lil Wayne Drops. So it's kind of mixing imagery and thinking about humanity and semiotics and like just imagery and humanity, and trying to suss it out for myself.
If nobody has any other questions, or comments, I
The
think
piece
we'll.
on the top is so haunting. Those eyes, it could be just, it's a forever face. It's a forever eyes.
Jen, is this your work on at the back here?
No, that's actually Lucrecia Troncoso's work. She's moving, so she couldn't be here today. But she definitely falls into the school of making, she's got, her work is very fine. And you know, I think she comes from the idea of, you know, woman as creator, and she makes some really beautiful stuff.
Do you have any work here?
I do. Here in the back.
Yeah, okay, we go and have a look.
We'll roll around later, but I think we'll wrap it up.
Any other
Thank you, guys.